and that is the true revolution for Poland. Portugal, which has had women in office but is once again reverting, it needs sisterhood and brotherhood. We see Annabel Cavaco Silva is a woman in Portugal, and we call upon her to find a sister and be sure that her brother Passos Coelho finds a brother, and all the cities and villages and the national region and the provincial regions of Portugal are 50-50 at least. Qatar, Romania. Romania is overdue. Romania has had women run for president but be ignored. Romania has to remember the history of the Unitarian Church in Romania. There was a queen and her son, and they brought forth religious tolerance to the region in antiquity when most of Europe was fighting religious wars. We say that was the precursor to sisterhood and brotherhood government in Romania, and it is achieved now by virtue of recognizing all of the women of Romania as co-secretary generals in receivership for the government until 50-50 with the men can be achieved. We've already said Russia. Russia has to redo its election, or it will receive terrible earthquakes from Mother Nature, and it will repeat Chernobyl and worse. It's got to understand the earth cannot take patriarchy anymore. Rwanda already has 50-50 in its legislature. We call upon Paul Kagame and Pierre Habumureme to pick two sisters as co-secretary generals for the national region. St. Kitts and Nevis, this is another situation with Queen Elizabeth. You know what we have to say about that. And Santa Lucia and St. Vincent. You know what we have to say about that. Samoa, San Marino, Sao Tome and Principe, Saudi Arabia. What a mess. It's time that the so-called kings of Saudi Arabia remembered that in Semitic culture there are also, in the greatest antiquity, goddesses and gods, Astarte. This is the time for monotheistic mother, father, goddess, god in Saudi Arabia. Let the women drive their cars and use the internet without having to check with their fathers and their brothers. This is 2012. That culture has to move along, or it will remain a desert, and it has caused its own deserthood by its practices against women. It's time that it grew up. Senegal, Serbia, Seychelles, Sierra Leone, Singapore, Slovakia, Slovenia, Solomon Islands, again a Queen Elizabeth fiasco. It's time that she brought forth women from the local region to take her place and have true democracy. Somalia, South Africa, does have a call for 50-50 in its constitution. It needs to fully achieve it, and the president, Mr. Zuma, has to find two women and a man, or get out of the way, and we call the women of South Africa, including Mrs. Tutu and her husband, who have called for a revolution for women, the true leaders of South Africa, until it achieves 50-50. The women of South Africa and the men who call for 50-50 are the co-secretary generals of the region of South Africa. South Korea has had women vice presidents, but it isn't enough. The legislature has to be 50-50. And it's time for there to be the yin and the yang that is in the national flag of Korea, to stand upright and to have women and men equally important in a flow of mutual complementarity in sisterhood and brotherhood. That's what 2012 yin and yang means. And dating back to 2000. South Sudan, Spain. Mr. Zapatero brought forth almost 50-50 in his government. He had 50-50 in his cabinet. He had women vice presidents. We say that it's time for King Juan Carlos to move over and let a common person, woman and women, takes his place, and Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy do the same. Bring forth brotherhood at all, sisterhood and brotherhood at all regions of Valencia and Granada, and all of the culture of Spain. Sri Lanka, Sudan, Suriname, Swaziland, Sweden we've already mentioned. Sweden has to get beyond its king and go to full democracy, which is the true queen and kingdom of the common person, and be sure that it has 50-50, not only in the legislature, which it has for almost decades now, but at the top of the government as well. And that top should be considered all equal to the cities and the villages of Sweden. All equal, no hierarchy here. The only hierarchy is Mother, Father, God. Switzerland, same thing. They've had women vice presidents and presidents, and they have some on the, they have the Federal Council, which includes Evelyn Wilmer-Schlumpf, Julie Maurer, Doris Leifauer, Simona Samanga, and Johann Schneider-Ammann and Ellen Bersell. They're close to practicing 50-50. We call it for all the cantons of Switzerland, and you will become a true peace culture and lead the world. Syria, Tajikistan. Syria is a mess. Look at Syria. This is what happens when there are no government posts filled by enough women. This is exactly what happens. It is absurd. Mrs. Assad has been holding women of Syria down instead of bringing them up. It is time for her to call for sisterhood and brotherhood in her own government and make peace there, and assure that her husband or any factions in Syria take part in 50-50 brotherhood and sisterhood in the legislatures and in the executives of the village councils of Syria, and peace will come to Syria without Kofi Annan having to run back and forth from a gender-imbalanced United Nations and pretending he can bring peace. It is time that Mrs. Nana Annan said to Kofi, call for 50-50 in all the governments of the world as of 2000, and call the women of the world co-secretary generals in receivership until 50-50 is achieved. We've already said Uganda is moving toward 50-50. We give them kudos for their progress. It's time to make it 50-50. Ukraine. Again, we need 50-50 in sisterhood and brotherhood. United Arab Emirates has given women the vote, but not enough seats. It has to have 50-50. We've already said what the facts are about what's called the United Kingdom, an abysmal name, in a country that's half female and led by a female in doing that. It's really a strange thing. We've already said what a drag the United States has had. We call upon Mr. Obama to get rid of Mr. Biden now or get out before the election. You are 3 years late from 2008. If Hillary Clinton hasn't got the sisterhood within her developed well enough, and she needs psychological help to get past the control of her philandering husband, and if you can't overcome the fact that your wife never mentions 50-50 to you, then you're in trouble. Mrs. Obama has to call for 50-50 now. It's overdue. It was required in 2008. And if that couple doesn't do it, then in the eyes of Mother and Father God, they are already out of office. No election needs to be held to declare the women of the United States 50-50 co-secretary generals of their national region, and any men who will come forward for 50-50 to be their co-leaders. That is the actual government of all the cities, villages, and states of the United States, and has been since 2000. And again, we say that Bush Cheney never were elected in the eyes of Mother and Father God. Never had a minute were they in office in the eyes of Mother and Father God. They even didn't get the popular vote let alone have Sisterhood and Brotherhood. They've never won an election, and yet they sat there for 8 years. It's one of the freaks of degraded human nature that patriarchy causes, that we tolerated that government for 8 years.